talking about stretching for the kids, how you believe that parents should go ahead and move this forward and give them the skills. So
you got to stretch these kids just outside the comfort zone. No sudden surprises. Don't just shove them into something new. But when I was a little kid, I was party hostess at my mother's parties. And I was taught how to shake hands with the guests and serve the snacks. I learned how to shop. I was taught how to save money. I knew that if I got 50 cents a week for allowance, I could buy 5 comics. But if I wanted a 69-cent airplane, I had to save for 2 weeks. That was teaching very basic skills. Autism is an awfully big spectrum. And it goes from someone who never learns to speak to maybe Einstein, had no language till age 3, or some of the people out in Silicon Valley like Steve Jobs who brought you the iPhone. It's a huge spectrum, from kids that are just sort of socially awkward to individuals that may have very, very severe handicaps with epilepsy on top of it. And it all has the same name. We got to start looking at what the kid can do. There's too much overprotecting of these kids, and they're not learning things like shopping, ordering food in restaurants, basic table manners. Mm-hmm. I was brought up in the 50s, old-fashioned teachable moments. If I used my fingers in the potatoes, my mother would say, use the fork. She would just give the instruction. You've got to teach these kids social rules, like teaching somebody in a foreign country. Like, for example, in China, it's rude to point with your finger, you point like this. Now, for me to know that, somebody has to teach that to me. You've got to just teach these kids, because some of them are really smart. I've talked to people who are in physics and NASA, and I'm pretty sure we're on the mild end of the spectrum. A brain can either be more thinking or a brain can be more social emotional. And there's a wide variation. It's just part of normal variation. There's no black and white dividing line between mild autism, geeks and nerds, and maybe really smart and maybe gifted.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so for you, tell me about your experience where you, when you were little, like what do you think accounted for the victories in your life, the things that you've learned?
Well, when I was a little kid, I had no speech until age 4. At age 2.5, I was put into very good early intervention, applied behavior analysis type of speech therapy. Then when I was 3, my mother hired a nanny who taught me turn-taking games. You've got to keep these little kids engaged. You can't just let them sit in a corner stimming and rocking. And when I was young, loud sounds hurt my ears. There's a lot of sensory issues. I discussed that in my book, The Autistic Brain, which has been translated into Portuguese.
Okay, great.
You've got to start working on these little kids early. And then you might have the more Asperger type, where there's no speech delay. The child's maybe 8 or 9 years old, no friends. And where they're going to get friends is through shared interests. Get them into things like art, music, theater, band, robotics, and we've got to watch the video game playing. A lot of these kids are getting addicted to video games, and they're going nowhere. You need to limit that to 1 hour a day.
That's great. So you were always interested in one area, but it sounds like your family wanted you to have more interests and be involved in different things.
You've got to get kids out looking at things. I mean, people ask me all the time, how did I end up in the cattle industry? How did I end up a professor of animal science at Colorado State University? In fact, just yesterday I was doing my class showing students how to handle cattle. I got interested in the beef industry because I was exposed to cattle when I was 15 years old. We need to get students out there, get them exposed to art, to dance, to theater, to engineering, to building things. And then they might find out what kind of careers they're going to be interested in. Students get interested in things they get exposed to.
Right. And so you talked a little bit about your sensory issues. Did you work on those sensory issues? I mean,
the thing with the sound sensitivity is if a child has some control over it, it's often better tolerated. Okay, let's say you can't tolerate the big noisy shopping center. So we go into the shopping center, it gets too noisy, you can say, okay, I'll go like this, then I'll take you out. Or the child might have a headset to block out the noise. Well, I want you most of the time to wear it around your neck. It's there if you need it, but you want to try not to wear it. But it's there if you really need it. You see, and that's giving the child the control, you know, and then when he's in control of the sound, then he's better able to tolerate it.
Right. And so Talk about anxiety and autism. That's something that we are presenting about, and we focus a lot on the treatment of anxiety and autism. So share with us your experience with that.
I had horrible anxiety issues, but I want to make it really plain. That's not true for everybody on the spectrum. In my book, The Autistic Brain, I talk about visual thinkers like me who think in pictures. I talk about the mathematical thinkers who think in patterns, and the word thinkers. A lot of the visual thinkers and a lot of artists that are not autistic tend to have a lot of anxiety issues. And in my book, Thinking in Pictures, I have a chapter where I describe my experiences with anxiety. When I got into puberty, I felt like I was in a dangerous jungle full of predators, always vigilant, heart beating over just nothing. And I found that exercise helped. I found that pressure from my squeezing machine helped. But as I went through my 20s, that panic attacks got worse. And when in my early 30s, I went on a low dose of antidepressant medication. It stopped the anxiety. I also found out in brain scan study done a few years ago that my amygdala and fear center was larger than normal. But that's not true for everybody. So I'm one of the ones where medication is needed. Now there's people with more milder anxiety where maybe cognitive behavior therapy will work. But for me, I needed the medication because trying to stop it with behavior would be like spitting on a blast furnace. And that's not going to be very effective.
Right.
I want to caution, if you use a drug like Zoloft, Prozac, that's sertraline or fluoxetine, to treat anxiety, you use lower doses sometimes in the label. Too high a dose will cause agitation and insomnia. I've had probably 50 parents tell me, he did just great on a low dose. We doubled it and he couldn't sleep and he got all agitated.
Right. Some children with autism react differently, right, to the
You
medications.
have to use low doses.
Yes.
And these drugs work like magic for me. In
Great.
terms of stopping the panic attacks.
What we do a lot, Temple, is we do the combination of cognitive behavior therapy with the medication.
And that's the best approach.
Yes.
You've got, because what I tell people is that medications hit the primitive bottom parts of the brain. Cognitive behavior therapy hits the top of the brain. So you got to hit the brain from both the top and the bottom, and that's going to be the most effective.
That's great. That's a very good analogy. I love that. We actually love that. So for our families who actually just got a diagnosis, can you share some of words with them? What would you say to them?
Well, if you have a 3-year-old that's not talking, even if you don't have a diagnosis, you got a little kid, 3 years old, and there's no speech and a lot of strange behavior, don't wait. You must start working with that kid now. Play nursery rhymes to him, teach him words, teach him how to take turns. Do all kinds of activities where you have to take turns. Because the worst thing you can do with a 3-year-old that's not talking is to do nothing, regardless of diagnosis.
Right.
That treatment's the same no matter what's wrong with them.
Exactly. We're treating the symptoms anyway, right? The difficulties that they have.
Well, if you don't treat it, he won't develop. And you teach him table manners, old-fashioned 50s parenting, turn-taking games, table manners. Use teachable moments. This is a 1950s method of parenting. This worked for me. So if I'm in the store and I grab a candy bar, a mother would say, put it back, we're not buying candy today. Or in another situation, I might touch a toy. She might say, you only can touch the things you're going to buy. She would give me the instruction rather than yelling. She didn't scream no. She gave me the instruction of what I should do. And in a single meal, you might have 5 to 10 teachable moments.
So what you're saying is that children with autism need to be taught the same way as anyone else.
They need to be taught, but the 1950s style of parenting works better.
Oh, great.
Because manners and things like shopping were taught in a much more structured manner. It's like training somebody in a foreign country. They're not going to just learn it, picking it up. You've got to teach them how to behave.
Excellent.
You teach them how to shake hands, how much pressure you use, how many shakes. You just have to teach them. So maybe in a church, you have them be an usher. And then you have certain people in the congregation set up to go shake hands with them. They've got to learn it by doing and have people teach them. And if they shake hands wrong, then you got to show them how to do it.
Absolutely.
You got to get them out doing things. Learn shopping, manners. But I always had plenty of time for creativity. It's strict, mismanners meals. But then in between the meals, I could spend hours experimenting with my bird kites and with my parachutes, all my aviation experiments. Artwork, my ability in art was always encouraged all the time.